Dylan Zeller hadn't eaten a full lunch in weeks, but today he split his sandwich in half and handed it to the quiet woman sitting alone on the park bench next to him. She blinked at it like he'd offered her a gold bar. "You look like you haven't eaten either," he said, giving her a small shrug, trying not to seem too desperate or too proud. "It's just turkey and cheese. Nothing fancy." The woman hesitated. Her fingers were pale, delicate, and she clutched a worn leather notebook to her chest like it was the only thing holding her together. Finally, she took the sandwich, her eyes flicking up to meet his. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, almost unsure. "I didn't expect kindness today." He gave a tired smile. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect to share my lunch either, but here we are." Dylan didn't tell her he was a struggling mechanic working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table for his 6-year-old son, Theo. He didn't say how the lunch was really meant for Theo, but his son had insisted he bring it to work with him because Dad never eats enough. The woman took a tiny bite, and her eyes fluttered closed like it was the best thing she'd tasted all year. "Good?" he asked, amused. She nodded. "It's perfect." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the kind that wasn't awkward but oddly peaceful. The city buzzed around them, honking cars, shouting vendors, children laughing in the nearby playground, but the bench felt like a tiny bubble of quiet. "I'm Dylan," he said, offering her his hand. She hesitated before pressing her palm to his. Gianna Vale. "Nice to meet you, Gianna." She nodded again, more to herself than to him, and looked down at her notebook. "You a writer?" he asked, motioning to it. Gianna hugged it tighter. "Something like that." Before he could say more, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and cursed under his breath. "Shoot, I'm late picking up my son from school." Gianna's eyes lifted. "You have a son?" "Yeah, Theo. He's 6. Smartest kid I know. Loves dinosaurs and grilled cheese more than life itself." A soft smile tugged at her lips. "He sounds amazing." "He is. And he'll kill me if I'm late again." Dylan stood, brushing crumbs off his jeans. "Thanks for eating lunch with me." "Thank you for sharing it," she said gently. He turned to go but paused. Something about her pulled at him. "You gonna be here tomorrow?" Gianna looked surprised. "I might be. Then maybe I'll bring an extra sandwich." Her lips twitched. "I like that." He left with a strange flutter in his chest. The next day, she was there. Same bench. Same notebook. Same shy eyes. This time, he brought 2 sandwiches and a juice box for her. She laughed softly when he handed it to her. "You brought me a juice box?" "I had an extra. Kid wanted me to give you the good stuff." She looked genuinely touched. "Tell Theo I said thank you." They talked more that day. She asked about his job at the auto shop, about Theo, about how he managed everything. He answered honestly, not sugarcoating the struggle or pretending things were easier than they were. "You're doing a good job," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Most days I feel like I'm just trying not to drown." She met his eyes. "You're still swimming." That counts. Each day after that, she was there. Always alone, always quiet, but slowly opening up. She told him she used to work in publishing, but left after something happened. She didn't say what. Instead of pushing, Dylan just kept showing up. Every lunch hour, same bench. Sandwiches, juice boxes, and stories about Theo's latest obsession. In return, she'd read him snippets of her writing, her voice trembling at first, but growing steadier as the days passed. One rainy Tuesday, he showed up with no umbrella, soaked through from fixing a car in the downpour. She didn't hesitate. She stood and held her umbrella over him, even though she was getting drenched. "You're going to freeze," he said, laughing as water dripped from his hair. "So are you." They huddled together under the small umbrella, knees touching. The air between them changed. It wasn't just friendly anymore. It was something else. Something electric. Gianna looked up at him. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She just smiled, shy and warm, and stepped back. That night, Dylan couldn't sleep. Not because of the leaky ceiling or the overdue bills, but because he couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked at him. A week later, she wasn't at the bench. Nor the next day. By the 3rd day, he was pacing the sidewalk like a lost man. The 4th day, he brought Theo with him. He didn't explain why, just told his son they were going for a walk. Theo tugged at his hand. "Dad, are you looking for the lady with the notebook?" Dylan stopped. "Yeah, I am. She was nice. You smiled more when you talked about her." He didn't know what to say to that. They sat on the bench. The sandwiches felt heavier in his bag. He watched the street, the sidewalk, the cafe across the road. But she didn't come. Maybe she had a bad day, Theo said, chewing his crusts. Maybe, Dylan murmured. But the truth was, he didn't even know her last name. Just a first name and the way she held that notebook like it was a lifeline. The next Monday, she was back. He spotted her from across the street and nearly dropped the takeout bag he'd splurged on. She looked different, tired, pale, like she'd been crying. He didn't ask questions. Just sat beside her and offered her the sandwich. She took it slowly, then looked at him. I'm sorry I disappeared. I figured something happened. She nodded. It did. My father passed away. I had to go back home for the funeral. I'm sorry, Gianna. She looked at him with those wide, sad eyes. Thank you. It was complicated. He wasn't a good man, but he was my father. He didn't say anything, just reached out and took her hand. She held on like she needed it. They sat like that for a long time. When they finally stood to leave, she turned to him. Can I take you to dinner? He blinked. Me? Yes. You've been feeding me for weeks. Let me return the favor. He hesitated. I'm not exactly dressed for anywhere fancy. She smiled. I don't care. That Friday night, she met him outside his apartment building in a sleek black car. He opened the passenger door and froze. Theo stared up at him from the doorway. Dad, you look nervous. I am nervous, Dylan muttered. Gianna stepped out of the car, dressed in a simple navy dress, her hair pinned back. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You look stunning. She blushed. So do you. He didn't. But he appreciated the lie. They drove to a restaurant that made his wallet sweat just by looking at the valet sign. She handed off the keys without blinking. Inside, the chandeliers sparkled. The wine list was longer than his car payment history, and the waiter called her Ms. Vale with a reverent tone. Dylan leaned in. Okay, I have to ask. Who are you? Gianna smiled, her eyes twinkling. I was going to tell you tonight. He raised a brow. I'm Gianna Vale, she said softly, CEO of Vale Media. My father was billionaire publisher Dominic Vale. Dylan stared at her. She added quickly, I didn't tell you because I wanted you to like me for me. I didn't expect to like you this much. He sat back, stunned. You're a billionaire? She nodded. Yes. He let out a breathless laugh. And here I was thinking my half sandwich made me the generous one. Gianna reached across the table and took his hand. It was the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. His voice dropped. I'm just a mechanic with a kid and a leaky roof. You're also the man who made me laugh when I thought I couldn't, who fed me when I didn't know how to ask for help, who talks about his son with pride and love. You're more than enough, Dylan. For once, he didn't know what to say, so he just whispered, I'm really glad you sat on that bench. She smiled. I'm really glad you shared your lunch. The next morning, Dylan woke to the unmistakable sound of Theo humming in the kitchen, dragging a chair across the floor so he could reach the cereal cabinet. Dad, do we have the kind with the marshmallows or just the boring flakes? Dylan rubbed his eyes, still groggy. The boring flakes, buddy. We talked about sugar before school, remember? Theo groaned dramatically. But it's Friday. You said that yesterday. It was true then, too. Dylan chuckled as he swung his legs off the couch. He'd ended up falling asleep there again, still wearing the same shirt from dinner with Gianna. Her perfume lingered faintly on his sleeves, a warm, subtle scent he hadn't noticed until now. His phone buzzed with a message from the babysitter confirming she could pick up Theo after school. Dylan exhaled in relief. He had an overtime shift at the garage and couldn't afford to miss it. Not with rent due next week. Did you have fun last night? Theo asked, pouring half the box of flakes into a chipped bowl. Yeah, Dylan said, pouring milk for him. She's surprising. Theo munched thoughtfully. You like her? Dylan arched a brow. I like a lot of people. You like her different. You smiled with your whole face when she came to the door. Dylan blinked. How do you even know what that means? You do it when you look at me too, Theo said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Only when you're really happy. That hit him squarely in the chest. Later that afternoon, Dylan was elbow deep in an engine bay, grease smeared across his forearms, when the scent of vanilla and something faintly floral caught him off guard. He turned and saw Gianna standing cautiously just outside the garage doors, wearing jeans and a black top, her hair tied up in a loose twist. You didn't have to come all the way here, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I wanted to. she replied, stepping closer. Also, you left your jacket in the car last night. I didn't even notice, he said, accepting it. Thanks. She tilted her head. You okay? Yeah, just swamped. The guy who normally handles diagnostics called out again. She looked past him at the rows of half-finished cars and the cluttered workbenches. This place could use a front desk. We had one. Then the desk broke and the guy who ran it quit. Without asking, she picked up a clipboard from a nearby tool cart and walked over to a customer waiting near the door. Dylan watched in disbelief as she started talking, calmly and efficiently, jotting down the car's make and model, then directing the man to a seat near the vending machine. When she returned, she handed Dylan the clipboard. There. Intake done. He stared at her. You didn't have to do that. I know. But I'm not great at sitting still. He wanted to say something else, maybe ask why someone like her, a woman who owned a media empire, was spending her afternoon helping at a garage that barely kept the lights on. But before he could, his boss appeared from the back, looking harried. Dylan, I need you on the Lexus. The battery's toast and the guy's already threatening to call his lawyer. On it, Dylan called back. Gianna touched his arm lightly. I'll hang around. Unless you'd rather I didn't. He looked down at her hand, then met her eyes. I'd rather you did. By the time the shift ended, the sun had dipped low, and the sky glowed with the soft orange of early evening. Dylan peeled off his coveralls and found Gianna sitting on a milk crate near the exit, sipping a soda and flipping through a car magazine. You're still here, he said, surprised. She stood and brushed off her jeans. I figured you might want dinner. I can't afford anything with real silverware tonight. Good thing I brought something, she said, holding up a brown paper bag. Sandwiches. I hear they're your specialty. They ate on the hood of a beat-up sedan in the lot, passing the soda between them. The city moved around them, the occasional honk, the low whir of passing bikes, but it all felt oddly quiet. Gianna peeled a corner of her sandwich and said, I used to sneak out of meetings and sit in the company garage. Dylan paused. Why? My father made everything feel like a performance. Every word, every smile. But the mechanics never cared who I was. They'd let me sit in the corner and read, or hand me a wrench and show me how to change oil. He watched her quietly. Sounds like they were the only ones who saw you. She looked at him, eyes glinting. I feel like you do too. He swallowed. I don't know what I'm doing, Gianna. In what way? With you. Us. I don't have the time or the money or the energy for dating. And you. You're from a different world. She nodded slowly. And yet, I keep showing up. Why? Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm pretending. Dylan ran a hand through his hair. I've got a kid. A life I can barely keep upright. I'm not a project. I don't want to fix you, she said. I just want to be near you. His throat tightened. I don't know how to be with someone who can buy a building before breakfast. Gianna stepped closer. Then don't think about the buildings. Think about this. Right here. Me, you, and a sandwich on a car hood. He stared at her, and for a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't polished or planned or anything like the perfect movie moment. His fingers were still smudged with grease, and she tasted faintly of soda and peanut butter. But it was real. Raw. Honest. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I've waited a long time for something real. He rested his forehead against hers. Me too. Back at the apartment that night, Dylan tucked Theo into bed and sat by the window, staring out at the city. The walls were still thin. The roof still leaked when it rained. But something had shifted. The next morning, Dylan found an envelope tucked under his front door. Inside was a simple note written in Gianna's elegant script. Let me take you out this time. Just say yes. Below it was an address. No name, no explanation. He stared at it for a long time. When he arrived later that evening, he was certain he'd gotten the wrong place. It wasn't a restaurant or a hotel, but a quiet rooftop garden above a building downtown. Strings of soft lights drifted overhead, and a table for two stood waiting near the edge, overlooking the skyline. Gianna turned when he stepped onto the rooftop. She wore a dark blouse and her hair was loose, catching the wind. You did all this? I made a few calls, she said, smiling. You always do that. Only when I'm nervous. Why would you be nervous? Because this matters. He stepped closer. Yeah. It does. They ate under the stars, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Dylan didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt seen, anchored, alive. When the night ended, she walked him to the elevator and touched his cheek gently. "I want to meet Theo," she said. He nodded. "He'll like you." "I hope so." He kissed her again, slower this time. A promise. And for once, he let himself believe it was one he could keep. Theo was still brushing crumbs off his shirt when Gianna stepped through the apartment doorway for the first time. "Hi," she said gently, crouching down so she was eye level with him. "You must be Theo." He eyed her with the silent scrutiny only a 6-year-old could pull off. "Are you the one who brought Dad fancy sandwiches and made him wear that weird button-up shirt?" Gianna laughed, caught off guard. "I might be guilty of that." "She's okay," Theo announced to Dylan, climbing back onto the couch. "She didn't bring raisins." Dylan leaned in, lowering his voice. "That's the highest praise you'll get from him." "I'll take it," she whispered back. The three of them spent the afternoon in the small living room. Gianna helped Theo build a lopsided dinosaur out of plastic blocks, while Dylan cooked pasta in the cramped kitchen. The room smelled faintly of garlic, and the cinnamon candle Theo insisted on lighting every evening. The radiator hissed in the corner, and the ceiling still bore the water stain that had spread further since last week's rainstorm. After dinner, Theo tugged Gianna toward the bookshelf, which was more of a makeshift pile of books and dog-eared magazines. "You have to pick the bedtime story," he declared. "That's the rule." Gianna selected a story about a bear who wanted to fly, and Theo nestled into her side as she read, her voice growing softer until his eyes began to droop. Dylan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, watching the scene in front of him with a complicated ache in his chest. He'd spent years convinced that no one would ever willingly step into his messy little world, much less choose to stay in it. When Theo was finally asleep, Gianna eased herself off the couch and pulled the blanket up to his chin. "He likes you," Dylan said quietly from the kitchen. She turned to him. "I like him too." He handed her a mug of tea, and they stepped onto the fire escape, the metal groaning slightly beneath their weight. The city buzzed below, warm air rising up with the scent of car exhaust and street food. Gianna pulled her knees up and rested her chin on them. "I used to think I'd never want a family," she said after a while. Dylan glanced over. What changed? She didn't look at him. Everything felt like a transaction growing up. Love, time, even conversations. "My father made deals with everyone, including me. So I told myself I didn't need anyone." It was easier than being disappointed. He didn't respond right away. The breeze tugged at his hair, and he watched a group of teenagers skate past the building below. "And now?" he asked. She turned her head, meeting his eyes. "Now I look at your son's drawings on the fridge, and I want to belong somewhere." He didn't kiss her then. He didn't need to. The space between them was already full. Over the next few weeks, Gianna became a fixture in their lives, not in a loud, sweeping way, but in the small, steady kind that built something solid. She picked Theo up from school when Dylan's shifts ran late. She taught him how to fold paper cranes and helped him start a garden in a chip planter box on the windowsill. She never tried to take over, just fit herself into the spaces they made for her. One Saturday morning, Gianna sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through Theo's art supplies while Dylan fixed a dripping faucet in the bathroom. "I think we're out of glue," she called. "You're sitting next to 3 tubes, he replied. "They're all empty." He's been using them to stick his socks together. Dylan appeared in the doorway with a wrench in one hand and a toothbrush in the other. "That explains why none of them match anymore." Gianna looked up and blinked. "Is that my toothbrush?" "Don't ask," he said, tossing it in the trash. She grinned and stood. "I'm taking Theo to the art store. Want to come?" He shook his head. "I've got to meet my landlord about the leak above the stove." Again, she hesitated, then reached into her bag and handed him a folded document. "What's this?" he asked. "An estimate. For repairs. And insulation. And new appliances." He opened it slowly, frowning. "You hired a contractor?" "Just for an estimate. I know a guy. He owed me a favor." "Gianna, I'm not asking you to say yes. Just look at it." Dylan set it down carefully on the counter. "I don't want you paying for my life." "I'm not. I'm offering to invest in it." He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "It's hard for me to accept help." "I know," she said quietly. "But you've given it freely since the first turkey sandwich." He didn't respond. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Dylan." He caught her hand and held it. "Let me think about it. That's all I ask." Later that evening, she returned with Theo and a bag full of glitter, glue, and something that looked suspiciously like a toy trumpet. Dylan was finishing up dinner when Theo ran over, holding a folded piece of paper. "She helped me write this," he said proudly, shoving it into Dylan's hand. It was a short letter, scrawled in crayon. "Dear Dad, I think Gianna is magic. But the good kind. Like the kind in stories. Can she stay?" Dylan stared at it for a long time. That night, as Gianna stepped into her car, he followed her outside. "I read the letter," he said. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I think he's right," Dylan added. "About the magic." Her breath caught, just slightly. "I'm not good at this," he continued. "I don't know how to plan for a future that doesn't scare the hell out of me." "You don't have to," she said. "Just start with now. Then come back inside." Gianna hesitated. "Are you sure?" He reached for her hand. "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, she stayed not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. She curled up on the couch with Dylan, Theo asleep in the next room, the sound of the city muffled by the closed windows. She didn't need her penthouse to feel grounded. She didn't need her father's legacy to feel powerful. In this tiny apartment with its mismatched chairs and uneven floors, she felt rooted in a way she never had before. And Dylan, for the first time in years, let himself dream about something more. Not someday, just tomorrow. And the day after that. And all the days Gianna might choose to stay. On the morning of Theo's school art showcase, Dylan found himself standing in front of his bedroom mirror, fidgeting with the collar of a shirt that still had the tags on. He bought it the night before after Gianna insisted he couldn't wear his usual oil-streaked flannel to something public and celebratory. "I'm not asking for a tux," she'd said, holding up a crisp navy button-down in front of him at the store. "Just something that doesn't look like it's been run over by a pickup." Now, with Theo already in his school uniform and Gianna downstairs helping him pack his handmade projects into a cardboard box, Dylan stared at himself and tried to ignore the tiny voice in his head whispering that he didn't belong at these kinds of events. Not with her. Not in this shirt. Not in that world. But when he stepped out into the living room, Theo ran up and gave him a thumbs up. "You look like someone who knows how to tie a tie." Gianna turned from the couch, where she was carefully wrapping one of Theo's clay sculptures in bubble wrap. "You clean up well. I feel like I'm going to a job interview for a position I'm not qualified for." She stood and crossed to him, smoothing the fabric at his shoulders. "You're more than qualified. You're his dad. That's the only title that matters today." He looked down at her, his fingers brushing against her wrist. "You're coming with us?" "I wouldn't miss it." At the school, the gymnasium had been transformed into a maze of tables and displays, every inch covered in finger paint, glitter, and pipe cleaner creations. Theo darted ahead, dragging his box toward the designated corner marked first grade. Gianna took Dylan's hand without hesitation, threading her fingers through his as they walked across the room. For the first time, he didn't hesitate to hold on. "Mr. Zeller," a woman said, approaching with a clipboard in hand. "Theo's teacher wanted to see you." "Just a quick chat." Dylan glanced at Gianna, who nodded. "Go. I'll help him set up." He followed the woman into a nearby classroom where Theo's teacher, Ms. Rayner, waited with a warm smile. "I just wanted to take a moment to tell you how much progress Theo's made," she said, gesturing to a folder of brightly colored worksheets. "His focus is stronger. His writing is clearer. And he talks about you all the time. It's clear he feels very safe and supported at home." Dylan swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. "Thank you. That means a lot." "He also mentioned someone named Gianna," she added gently. "Said she helps him with his reading now?" "Yeah," Dylan said, his voice quieter. "She's been around more lately." "Well, whoever she is, she's helping. He's thriving." Back in the gym, Dylan found Gianna crouched beside Theo, who was proudly explaining the story behind his crayon mural of a volcano erupting next to a dinosaur playing a trumpet. "He said it's based on real science," she said as Dylan approached. Theo beamed. "Dinosaurs should get to play music too." "Absolutely," Dylan said, ruffling his hair. "Especially trumpet solos." A few parents nearby were glancing over, some with curious expressions, others with polite smiles. Gianna didn't seem to notice or care. She crouched lower to adjust one of Theo's drawings, her bracelet catching the light. It wasn't until the principal stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room that Dylan noticed how many eyes were on them. A few parents whispered. One even nudged another and gestured toward Gianna. He leaned in close. "People are staring." She glanced up. "Then let them. You're not worried someone's going to recognize you?" They already have, she said, her tone light. I saw 2 reporters near the entrance. One of them tripped over a science fair volcano trying to get a picture. Dylan's stomach twisted. Are we going to end up on a gossip site? Probably, she said. But the caption will be worth it. And what's that? She turned to him with a soft smile. Billionaire girlfriend attends school art show with mechanic and his son. Love wins. Chaos ensues. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. You're seriously okay with this? I'm more than okay. I'm proud. When the event ended and parents began trickling out with their kids and art projects, Gianna knelt beside Theo. Hey, artist, she said. I'm going to head out for a bit, but I'll see you tonight, okay? He looked up at her, eyes wide. Where are you going? Just a quick meeting. Work stuff. You'll come back for movie night. Wouldn't miss it. He nodded solemnly, then leaned forward and hugged her around the neck. Bye, G. As she stood, Dylan followed her out into the hallway. You okay? Gianna nodded. I just have something I need to handle before tonight. He studied her. Sounds important. It is. She hesitated, then leaned in and kissed him lightly. Trust me? Always. Later that evening, Dylan stood at the stove stirring pasta, while Theo flipped through movie options on the couch. Can we watch the one with the talking raccoon again? He called. Only if we don't pause it every 5 minutes for snack breaks this time. But snack breaks are the best part. Before he could answer, there was a knock at the door. Theo jumped up. I'll get it. Dylan followed just in time to see Theo open the door and freeze. Outside stood a man in a navy suit holding a clipboard, and behind him, a delivery team carrying box after box up the stairwell. Delivery for Dylan Zeller, the man said. From Vale Holdings. Dylan stared. What is this? The first part of a home renovation package, the man replied. We were told to start with appliances and work our way up. Theo's eyes widened. Are we getting a new fridge? The man nodded. And a new stove. And a washer-dryer combo. And Dylan stepped onto the landing, holding up his hands. Wait, I didn't approve any of this. I haven't signed a thing. The man handed him a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. You said you needed time to think. I gave you time. Now I'm giving you choice. If you don't want any of this, I'll call them off. But if you're ready to start building something real with me, then let them in. GPS. The fridge comes pre-stocked with juice boxes. He lowered the note and looked at the delivery man. Give me 5 minutes. Back inside, Theo was bouncing on the balls of his feet. Is this real? Are we getting real stuff? Dylan crouched down. What if we are? Would that be okay? Theo nodded so hard his curls bounced. It'd be more than okay. Dylan stood and walked to the door. All right, he called. Let's get started. The team moved quickly, efficiently, replacing dingy appliances with gleaming stainless steel ones, hauling out the old stove, installing a new fridge, even setting up a compact washer-dryer unit in the hallway closet. Within an hour, the apartment looked different, brighter, cleaner, like a place where something new could grow. After they left, Dylan stood in the kitchen and ran his hand over the smooth surface of the new countertop. Then he picked up the phone and called Gianna. You didn't have to do all this, he said when she answered. I know. But I wanted to. I'm not used to people showing up for me like this. Well, she said, get used to it. He glanced at Theo, who was now organizing his juice boxes by flavor. You're coming back soon? Already on my way. He hung up and turned to Theo. You know she's not just doing this for us, right? Theo nodded. She's doing it because she wants to stay. That night, after the movie ended and Theo fell asleep on the couch mid-scene, Gianna curled up beside Dylan in the armchair, her legs draped over his lap. I've been thinking, she said. About the future. He looked at her, eyes weary but open. Yeah, I have a beach house, she said. Not the big kind. Just a quiet place in Montauk. No staff. No press. It's empty most of the year. Sounds peaceful. I want to take you both there. Just for a week. No phones. No meetings. Just ocean and sand and time. He reached for her hand. That sounds like exactly what we need. So you're saying yes? I'm saying yes to all of it. The beach house. The future. You. She leaned in and kissed him, slow and certain. 6 weeks later, they stood barefoot on the sand, Theo chasing waves with a kite in hand, and Gianna laughing as the wind pulled at her dress. Dylan watched them from the porch of the little gray house, sunlight warming his skin and something deeper warming his chest. He'd given a stranger half a sandwich. She'd given him everything else. And for the first time in his life, Dylan Zeller knew exactly what it felt like to be chosen not for who someone wanted him to be, but for exactly who he already was. The late summer wind rolled in off the ocean in slow, salty gusts, ruffling the edge of the picnic blanket where Gianna lay beside Dylan on the sand. Theo was up ahead, barefoot and soaked, chasing the retreating waves with a stick in one hand and a jellyfish-shaped bucket in the other. The laughter that echoed off the shoreline was so full and unguarded, it tugged something loose in Dylan's chest. Gianna turned her head toward him, her hair tangled from the breeze, her expression unreadable. I used to think silence like this meant something was wrong. Dylan looked up at the pale sky. Now it just means nothing's broken. She rolled onto her side, propping her elbow up. I don't think I've ever let myself be bored before. You're not bored, he said, brushing a grain of sand from her cheek. You're at rest. She let out a soft breath. You're right. I don't think I've ever been. Theo came sprinting back toward them, sand flying behind him in erratic bursts. There's a crab under the lifeguard chair. It has one big claw, and it's not even scared of me. Gianna sat up, laughing. Maybe we can convince him to join us for lunch. I already named him, Theo said proudly. His name is Captain Pinch. Obviously, Dylan replied, deadpan. As Theo ran off again to check on his crustacean companion, Gianna pulled her knees to her chest and stared out at the horizon. I have to be in Manhattan next weekend, just for a few days. There's a board meeting I can't miss, and a full review of this year's publishing slate. Dylan nodded slowly. You nervous about going back? She hesitated. I'm nervous about not wanting to. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. We're not going anywhere. You come back when you're ready. I keep thinking about what it would mean to really step down, she admitted. To hand over control. I've spent my whole life being the face of Vail Media. But lately I keep wondering if that's who I am or just who I was taught to be. Dylan's voice was calm. You don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Not even to him. Gianna looked at him, something raw flickering behind her eyes. Do you think Theo would be okay if I stayed for real? Not just for weekends. Not just for beach trips. He tilted his head toward the boy twirling in the surf, his arms wide like airplane wings. I think he already thinks you live with us. She laughed quietly, and it was the kind of laugh that didn't ask permission. That night, after Theo fell asleep between them with one arm flung across Gianna's stomach and the other tangled in Dylan's shirt, she whispered into the dark, I don't want to go back to empty hallways and a view that doesn't mean anything. Dylan didn't say anything for a moment. Then don't. The next morning, she made 2 phone calls from the porch. The first was to her CFO. The second was to her board chair. By the time she walked back inside, barefoot and still in one of Dylan's old t-shirts, her hands were shaking. I just named my successor, she said, her voice light but stunned. Effective immediately. Dylan set down the mug he was drying. You're serious. Gianna walked toward him, slowly, deliberately. I didn't want to keep one foot in both worlds. I've spent too much of my life doing that already. He stepped forward until they were face to face. You just gave up your empire in sweatpants. I'm building a new one, she murmured, slipping her arms around his waist. This one has glitter glue and cereal bowls and a man who tells me the truth even when I'm not ready to hear it. He rested his forehead against hers. You really staying? I'm not going anywhere. Over the next few months, the rhythm of their life shifted from unfamiliar to instinctual. Gianna moved into Dylan's apartment not all at once, but piece by piece. First came the books, then the coats, then the low hum of classical music in the kitchen on Thursdays when she made Theo's favorite lemon pancakes. They used her beach house for long weekends, but always returned to their neighborhood, where Theo had friends and Dylan had work and Gianna had found something she never expected to, peace. She didn't miss the boardrooms. She didn't miss the headlines. What she found herself craving instead were the ordinary things, the sound of Theo's laughter echoing down the hallway, the smell of fresh laundry, the way Dylan looked at her like she was still surprising him. One evening in mid-October, Dylan picked her up from the community center where she'd started volunteering with a local literacy program. She was standing under the awning, arms wrapped around a stack of donated books. He stepped out of the truck and took them from her. You're late, he teased. I lost track of time. One of the kids asked if I was a fairy godmother. Did you say yes? I said I was more like an assistant to one. When they got home, Theo was already asleep. Dylan flipped the porch light on while Gianna set the books down on the kitchen table. Then he reached into the cabinet and pulled out a small velvet box. She turned, confused. What's that? He walked toward her, slowly. I was going to wait until Thanksgiving. Or maybe Christmas. Something big. But then I realized every day with you already feels like a holiday I didn't think I'd ever get. She swallowed, her eyes wide. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, elegant but unflashy, with a single round diamond set low into the band. I love you, he said. I love the way you talk to Theo like he's already the best version of himself. I love the way you sit on the floor when you're thinking. I love that you gave up everything you thought made you powerful just to be present. Will you marry me? Gianna's voice caught. This is the part where I'm supposed to cry, right? You don't have to, he said gently. I already am, she whispered, blinking rapidly. Yes. Of course yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She leaned in and kissed him, long and slow, her hands in his hair, his arms pulling her close. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. Do you think he's going to freak out? She asked. Theo. She nodded. He smiled. He's going to ask if he can give a speech at the wedding. They told him the next morning over pancakes. Theo stared at them, his mouth full, then raised a syrup-covered hand. Can I be the ring security? Gianna laughed. You mean ring bearer? No. Security. Like with sunglasses and an earpiece. Dylan nodded solemnly. Absolutely. The wedding was small and perfect. They didn't do it in a ballroom or a cathedral. They did it in the backyard of Gianna's Montauk house, under a canopy of lights strung between trees. Theo wore a tiny tuxedo and sunglasses and took his job extremely seriously. Gianna walked barefoot down the aisle, her dress simple and flowing, her hand clutching a bouquet of wildflowers Theo had helped pick. Dylan waited for her beneath the arch, his suit tailored and his eyes locked on hers like she was the only thing that had ever made sense. There were no vows written in advance. Just two people standing in the golden light of early evening, promising each other nothing less than everything. When it was done, they danced barefoot in the grass, Theo spinning in circles beside them, the music drifting from a single speaker perched on the porch. And afterward, when the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, Dylan carried her inside, her laughter against his neck, her hand resting over his heart. They didn't talk about what came next. They didn't have to, because they were already living it. The next morning, Theo burst into their bedroom with a plastic sword and declared them a royal family. Gianna sat up and reached for the crown made of construction paper he held out. What's my title? Queen of all sandwiches, he said proudly. And your dad? King of fixing stuff. Dylan laughed. Sounds accurate. And me? Theo asked, climbing onto the bed. Gianna pulled him into her lap. You're the heart of the kingdom. Years later, when people asked Gianna what made her fall in love with him, she never said the beach house or the ring or even the proposal. She always said it was the sandwich. Because that was the moment she realized kindness didn't need an audience. And love didn't need a spotlight. It just needed a bench, an open heart, and someone brave enough to offer half.